The Demon in the Mirror, the last guest of Blackwood Manor. Part 1. The Misty Coast and the Cold Invitation. The rain hammered against the windshield like thousands of tiny icy needles. In the Scottish Highlands, the weather was always like this damp, cold, and a shade of grey that seemed to crush the soul. Arthur Blake gripped the steering wheel tightly, navigating the narrow road shrouded in thick fog. His destination was clear: Blackwood Manor, an ancient fortress-like estate where he was to appraise and catalogue a rare library. Arthur was a restorer of antiquarian books based in London. The job had come with strange conditions. Mr. Harrington, the solicitor, had offered an astronomical fee for a seemingly simple task. "The owner values solitude," the lawyer had said in a dry tone. "You will not be disturbed. There is only one rule: do not approach the basement door at night." Arthur had laughed it off then. All old houses came with such legends. Finally, through the dense grove of ancient oaks, the colossal structure came into view. Blackwood Manor looked as if it had grown out of the jagged rock itself. Black, imposing, and malevolent. Its windows were like hollowed-out eye sockets, staring blindly into the gale blowing from the sea. As he stepped out of the car, the wind slapped his face. It wasn't just blowing, it seemed to whisper directly into his ear. "Leave, it is not too late." Arthur shook his head and turned up his coat collar. "Just the wind," he muttered. He approached the massive oak door and struck the heavy iron knocker. The door creaked open, but there was no one behind it. From inside came the smell of mold, old paper, and something else: the faint, sweet scent of rotting meat. Part 2. The Place Where Time Stopped. The interior of the house was even colder than the outside. A dust-covered chandelier hung in the vast hallway, and the figures in the portraits lining the walls seemed to track his every movement. "Mr. Blake?" The voice came suddenly from the direction of the staircase. Arthur jumped. Standing there was an elderly woman in a long black dress, her face as pale as wax. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Crowley. "I was expecting you," she said in a monotone voice. Her eyes were wrong. It looked as if she had no pupils, only whites. But when Arthur looked closer, they seemed normal. "Just fatigue," he thought. "Your room is ready. The library is on the second floor. Mr. Blackwood is indisposed and cannot see you," Mrs. Crowley said, turning her back on him. Arthur settled into his room. It was spacious but oppressive. A massive mirror dominated one wall. Its edges were blackened with age, and the frame was carved with grotesque demonic figures. As Arthur unpacked, he glanced at his watch. It was 6 p.m. But strangely, the antique clock on the mantelpiece and the grandfather clock in the hall had both stopped at exactly 03 Siguru. Did they all stop at the same time? Arthur wondered. That night, he had a vivid nightmare. He was standing before that mirror, but his reflection was not his own. The reflection had pitch-black eyes and a mouth torn open from ear to ear in a silent scream. It whispered, "Come to the basement." Arthur woke up gasping, his body drenched in cold sweat. Outside, a storm was raging, and in the flashes of lightning, the mirror in the room seemed to shimmer as if it were alive. Part 3. Ghosts in the Library. The next day, Arthur began his work. The Blackwood Library was a treasure trove. Manuscripts from the 17th century, books on the occult in Latin, strange journals bound in human skin. As he sorted the books, Arthur noticed something disturbing. There was no dust on the books. The rest of the house was covered in grime, but these books were pristine, as if they were being read every single day. Deep in the stacks, he found a diary from 1924. The cover read Thomas Blackwood. Curiosity took over, and he opened it. October 14th, 1924. The house is changing. The walls are breathing. Last night I heard that sound again. The scratching of fingernails behind the plaster. They are calling me. When my father built this house, he didn't say what he buried in the foundation. Now it is too late. The mirror, it is not just glass. It is a door. Arthur slammed the diary shut. A cold chill ran down his spine. Just then he heard a creak behind him. He spun around. No one was there. Only the wind from the open window, billowing the heavy curtains. But Arthur saw it clearly. In the dust on top of the bookshelf, fresh fingerprints had appeared. Long, unnatural, spindly fingers. Wasn't he and Mrs. Crowley the only ones in the house? Arthur went downstairs to find the housekeeper. In the kitchen, Mrs. Crowley was chopping meat. The sound of the cleaver hitting the wooden board was rhythmic and terrifying. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Mrs. Crowley, is there anyone else in this house? Arthur asked. The woman paused. She slowly raised her head. Only you, me, and them, she whispered. Who are them? The forgotten ones. She resumed chopping. Arthur realized he would get no answers from her. Part 4. The Vanishing Door. On the third day, Arthur noticed a discrepancy in the architecture. From the outside, the west wing of the house looked large, but inside, the corridor leading there was walled off. After studying the blueprints in the library, he deduced there must be a hidden door behind a large tapestry on the second floor. That evening, after Mrs. Crowley had retired to her quarters, Arthur took a lantern into the hallway. He lifted the heavy tapestry depicting a brutal hunting scene. Behind it was indeed a black oak door. It wasn't locked, merely rusted shut. Arthur pushed. With a heavy groan, the door gave way. The air that rushed out was so foul, Arthur had to cover his nose. This room hadn't been opened in decades. He shone his light inside. It was a nursery, old dust-covered toys, a broken crib, and in the middle of the floor, a strange pentagram drawn in what looked like charcoal. Black candles stood melted at each point of the star. But the most terrifying thing was at the far end of the room, a massive mirror, identical to the one in Arthur's room. But this one was smashed. Arthur approached the mirror. Among the shards was a dried black substance, blood or something worse. Suddenly, the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening bang. Arthur ran and yanked the handle. Locked. "Who is there? Open up!" he shouted. Instead of an answer, the sound of a child crying came from the corner of the room. "Daddy! Cold! It's so cold!" The voice was coming from inside the wall. Arthur shone the light at the wallpaper. It began to bubble and swell, taking the shape of a screaming human face. Screaming, Arthur kicked the door. The old lock gave way and the door flew open. He sprinted into the hallway and ran to his room, locking himself in. He sat on the bed, hands trembling uncontrollably. "I have to leave, first thing in the morning." Part 5. The phone call. Morning came. Arthur packed his bags. He went to the hallway telephone to call the lawyer, but there was no dial tone, only a low, guttural humming sound. The line was dead. His mobile phone had absolutely no signal here. He got into his car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, but sputtered and died seconds later. He tried again and again to no avail. "You cannot leave," a voice said. Arthur looked out the window. Mrs. Crowley was standing in the rain. She was holding the large meat cleaver. "The car is broken," Arthur said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Not the car. The road is closed. Mr. Blackwood does not wish for you to leave. You haven't finished your work." "Where is Mr. Blackwood? I want to see him. He is waiting for you, in the basement." Arthur saw that there was no humanity left in her eyes. He jumped out of the car and decided to walk through the woods to the main road rather than retreat into the manor. He ran. The rain and mud slowed him down. The trees seemed to grab at his clothes like living things. He ran for what felt like an hour. Finally, the trees thinned, and a building appeared ahead. Relief washed over him. "I'll ask for help," he thought. But as he got closer, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't another house. It was Blackwood Manor. He had been running in circles for an hour, only to end up exactly where he started. At the gate, Mrs. Crowley stood in the exact same spot, unmoving. A twisted smile played on her lips. "I told you, you cannot leave." Part 6. The secret of the basement night fell. Arthur was forced to return to the castle. Staying outside meant freezing to death. His goal was now clear: find the source of the curse and destroy it. The answer was in the basement. The lawyer's warning echoed in his mind. "Do not approach the basement door." Arthur grabbed a flashlight and a fire axe from the emergency case in the kitchen. Mrs. Crowley was nowhere to be seen. The house was silent, but it was a heavy, dangerous silence, like the calm before a slaughter. The basement door was behind the kitchen, hidden under a rug. Arthur lifted the trapdoor. Narrow stone steps spiraled down into darkness. The smell of rot was so overpowering, his eyes watered. He descended. The basement was much larger than expected. It wasn't just a cellar, it was an underground labyrinth. Arthur moved forward. Bones crunched under his boots. Animal bone and human bones. At the end of the tunnel, a dim light glowed. In a chamber resembling a ceremonial hall, a circle of hundreds of candles burned. In the center of the circle sat a figure in a wheelchair, facing away from him. "Mr. Blackwood!" Arthur called out, his voice trembling. The wheelchair slowly rotated. Arthur's blood turned to ice. The thing in the chair was not a man. It was a desiccated mummy. Its eyes had been gouged out, and its mouth was sewn shut with thick twine. But the most terrifying part wasn't the mummy. On its lap sat an open logbook and Arthur's own fountain pen. The ink on the last page was still wet. Arthur Blake, December 24th, 2025, voluntarily sacrificed his soul. No, Arthur stepped back. At that moment, whispering erupted from every corner of the room. "Give us your body. We need a new vessel." Part 7. The Mirror Trap. Arthur turned to run back to the stairs. but the path was blocked. Mrs. Crowley stood on the steps. Her face had changed completely. Her skin looked raw and red, as if flayed, and her teeth were sharpened to points like a predator's. "He is too old, Arthur," the creature rasped. "Mr. Blackwood needs a new body, a young, strong body." Arthur threw the axe at her. It struck the creature's shoulder, but she didn't even flinch. Laughing, she pulled the axe out and tossed it aside. Arthur scrambled backward toward the far end of the hall. There stood a massive, wall-sized mirror. Unlike the others, this one was intact. But Arthur didn't see himself in the reflection. Standing in the glass was a handsome young man in Victorian clothing. It was Thomas Blackwood. The Thomas in the mirror reached out a hand. "Help me," he pleaded. "If you free me, I can save you." Mrs. Crowley was closing in. Arthur had no other choice. "What do I do?" Arthur screamed. "Break the mirror," Thomas shouted. "It is the cage holding me." Arthur grabbed a heavy iron candlestick from the floor and swung it with all his might at the glass. Crash! The mirror exploded into thousands of shards. Instantly, the room shook violently. Mrs. Crowley let out a piercing shriek and crumbled into dust. The mummy in the wheelchair collapsed into a pile of ash. "I'm safe," Arthur thought, gasping for air. But suddenly, his hands began to change. His skin grew pale. His clothes morphed, weaving themselves into an old-fashioned Victorian suit. He looked down at a shard of the broken mirror. Staring back at him was not Arthur, but Thomas Blackwood. And on the other side of the glass trapped in the reflection was the real Arthur Blake, looking out in horror. He was now behind the glass. "Thank you, my friend," said the entity, inhabiting Arthur's body, testing its new voice. "I have waited 100 years for this moment. Now, it is your turn." Part 8. The Eternal Cycle. The rain had stopped. Arthur Blake walked out of the main doors of Blackwood Manor. He took a deep breath. Fresh air. Freedom. He climbed into Arthur's car. The engine started on the first try. As he drove through the gates, he glanced up at the rearview mirror, looking back at the house. In a second-floor window, a figure was standing. It pounded silently against the glass, screaming without sound. It was the real Arthur. He had become part of the house, its newest ghost. The man in the car smiled and pressed the accelerator. London was waiting. A new life, new victims. The house had a new guardian now. Back in the library, a new diary appeared on the desk. On the first page, written in a shaky hand, were fresh words. "My name is Arthur Blake. I am here. I am inside the walls. If you are reading this, run." But no one can run, because Blackwood Manor never likes to go hungry. The end.